is. All right. So what do we want to start out with first? Let's go ahead and knock out this story with Vince. So, like I said, the documentary was called Mr. McMahon. I thought it was good. It took you through the history of wrestling. There wasn't nothing new for me being a fan. Like I kind of knew a lot of the stuff. Most of it was just like regurgitating the history. And then not until part 5 and 6, it got into some serious allegations. But I want to say this. Even throughout the history of the WWE, like back through the 80s and early 90s, there were huge scandals there too. They talked about an incident called with Ring Boys. I forgot who the announcer was, but basically it was like messing with these young boys to promise them jobs, and not Vince McMahon, it was another guy, but somebody who worked for the company. Even Pat Patterson was entangled in that some way. Then you have the Jimmy Fly Snuka. Yes, Jimmy Fly Snuka. He was caught up in some shit where they said that he killed his girlfriend. Before Jimmy Snuka passed away, he was tied into a whole scandal about it was something like in a hotel room, the girl hit her head, but then the person who did the autopsy said like, oh no, this looks like murder. And so before Snuka actually passed away, he was on trial for that. So it's interesting. They didn't really dive too much into that. That's why I feel like it should have been a 2-part, like a whole separate documentary. One on Vince McMahon and then one on all the scandals of the WWE. I honestly feel like they didn't go all the way in. And one of the reasons why they didn't go all the way in is because now they kind of have a relationship with the WWE. WWE Raw is now going to be moving to Netflix in January. So even though Vince is not tied to the company anymore, he sold all his stock, it still looks bad if they really tell the true history. If they really go in and share the true history and have interviews with everybody involved, everyone involved, it would stir up some shit. It would really shake some shit up. It talked about the steroid controversy, the death of Chris Benoit. You know how he killed his wife and his son. It talked about that. Owen Hart when he fell from the sky. Well, not from the sky, from the ceiling in the Raptors. It talked about that. It covered a lot. It did cover a lot, but it's things we already knew. I feel like it really should have been 2 separate parts, one for the history and one for Vince McMahon. Because it's funny how Vince McMahon was a victim. This is something I didn't know. I knew he was abused by his stepfather, but did you guys know that he was SA'd by his mom? Let me take Vince off the screen for a minute. Did you know that he was SA'd by his mom? Now, I want to say something. I don't believe all victims then turn into the perpetrator. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that, you know, definitely this could have affected him mentally, because even in the docuseries, he says something to the effect of like, oh yeah, you just get over it. You just move on. So I feel like Vince has never actually dealt with his trauma. And another thing that was traumatic is that he didn't really know his dad until he was 12 years old. Mind you, he ended up buying the WWF originally, buying it from his dad, but he never really knew his dad. So you mix that in. His dad wanted to sell the company to someone else, didn't even want to sell it to his son. And he didn't like that his son kind of made wrestling mainstream. You know, the dad was used to that good old wrestling, you know, wrestling, WRASSLIN, compared to making it mainstream. So Vince had a totally different vision. Before I get into the bad stuff with Vince McMahon, I will say this. I feel like he's one of the people that no matter what wrestlers you think of, you can think of Stone Cold, you think of The Rock, you think of Hulk Hogan, whoever you think of, you're always going to think of Vince McMahon. None of this would have been possible. And I'm not just saying for the WWE, but WCW, now there's an AEW, all those wrestling federations would not have been able to be around without Vince McMahon. He was the blueprint for what wrestling is. When you think of wrestling, you think of you think of Vince McMahon. You think of him. You know that name. Even though he's not a wrestler himself, you know who Vince McMahon is. You know the name, you respect the name, you think of WWE when you think of Vince McMahon. So the way he transcended wrestling and really made it mainstream, you have to give him his credit. Now, him being a nasty, perverted bastard has nothing to do with him putting wrestling on the map. I want to say that. I want to be clear. Let's be clear on that. So there was a situation back in the 80s with a woman named Rita Chatton. I think it's Chatton. Rita Chatton, who was the first female referee, and she claimed that he forced her to give him fellatio. And now Vince in the documentary had said that it was consensual. And then he said something to the effect of like, oh, well, you know, it was a long time ago. So, you know, it doesn't really matter, to something to that effect. Like he didn't really care because it was a long time ago. I was like, you freaky 16, freaky ass ninja. You a 69 god. What is wrong with this man? And then you find out, which I already knew this, but they talked about there was a female wrestler back in, I believe it was either 2006 or 2007, that he forced her to into relations as well too. And a year later, after she like refused another time to do something, he then fired her, but ended up settling for $7 million. So that was a part of the $14 million that, you know, he was paying the hush money to. That $7 million was a part of it. And let's be honest about something. Is Vince ever going to be honest about how many women he actually paid off? It could have been more than that. The only reason why they knew about the 14 million is because that was paid through the company. That's what the problem is. The legal ramifications of that. He was paying through the company. And so now there's this backlash, and Vince is saying that he didn't like the documentary and that he thought that it showed him in a bad light. I don't think it was ever going to show you in a good life after all them allegations that came up. I'm sorry. Like I said, we appreciate everything that you've done for the business, but you need to go to jail with Diddy. Like, I'm just being honest, y'all. He needs to go to jail with Diddy. Because mind you, he is being investigated by the feds. Because the woman Janelle Grant had came out last year and was all and filed a lawsuit, said that she was trafficked, forced to have sex with other employees. He basically she was trying to get advancement in the company, but the only way she could get advancement is by sleeping with him. And then after she started a consensual relationship with him, that's when he gave her more money. And and I don't know if you guys have heard. Again, I already know this stuff, and they didn't mention it in the documentary, but the sex toys were named after other wrestlers. And then even her nudes and stuff like that, he showed it to another wrestler, Brock Lesnar. He showed it to another wrestler and was like, oh, he'll like you, blah, blah, blah. Oh, he really likes the way you look. And mind you, that lawsuit has all the text messages in there. It's bad. It's bad. And his former talent relations, John Laurinaitis, he already said, he put out a statement from a lawyer that said that whatever the feds need, he's willing to give them that information. So he's not going down with Vince McMahon. He's willing to give that information. Vince is 79 years old. He might be spending the rest of his life in jail. I would now Linda McMahon, his wife, Linda McMahon, the one that works for Trump. Yeah, that one. I would have liked to hear more from her about the cheating and stuff like that, because he admitted, like in the 90s in Playboy magazine, that he has cheated before in the past. But I would really had liked to hear her perspective about that. They talked more about the wrestling stuff with her than their actual personal relationship, because what kind of relationship they got? And you telling me multiple different women and she's just cool with that? Mind you, they're still married together. They're still married. They're still legally married. There's nothing about like they have separated. She moved on to someone else. Nothing. Nothing at all. And I'm all like, I guess if the money is good, why leave? I mean, they're billionaires, right? Something that I do want to commend, Stephanie McMahon, his daughter, and then Triple H, his son-in-law. Now they should have dived more into that, because let me give y'all a little wrestling tea. See how excited I am to talk about wrestling? I need to start a wrestling podcast. So for those of you who don't know, y'all remember the wrestler Chyna? Put a 1 in the chat. Chyna passed away. Put a 1 in the chat if you guys remember Chyna. Let me see in the chat. What's up, everybody? What's up, Mel? What's up, Cups? What's up, Grandma Joy? Put a 1 if you remember Chyna. Okay, yeah. So Chyna and Triple H were together. So there was a storyline where Triple H like sedated or drugged Stephanie McMahon, and they went through the drive-through and got quote unquote married. Well, with this storyline, they ended up becoming a couple, and they really, started dating in real life. Mind you, he was with Chyna and didn't even let Chyna know about it. Chyna figured out later on, but what could Chyna do, as she was just an employee, and Triple H is messing with the daughter, messing with the boss's daughter. Like, what was she going to be able to do? So I wish they would have dived into that more, because I feel like, what was really going on during that time? And it was like Chyna had got released or had quit or whatever after that, and then her life quickly went downhill, got involved with drugs and everything else, and she ended up ODing and she passed away. So yeah, like I said, like there's like little parts in there like they really didn't add in. Like there's a lot of different wrestlers where they should have spent time telling stories about each wrestler and stuff like that. But I understand this was supposed to be about Vince McMahon, but again, I feel like it should have been 2 separate documentaries. So maybe there'll be one that's coming later on. But yeah. But anyway, back to Triple H and Stephanie McMahon. Well, what ended up happening was that Vince last year had left the company, and after all the allegations and stuff like that. And so what ended up, in 2022, he left, right? Then what ends up happening is that he sells it to TKO, and that's why TKO, UFC, and WWE, they're the same company now. They end up selling it to TKO, and Vince ends up coming back. And Stephanie and Triple H, and with Nick Khan, who was, believe, like the vice president or whatever, they voted no to not bring him back. But they were overruled. There was only 3 people that voted him not to come back. And so he ended up coming back once he sold the company. And then when he came back, that's when, the lawsuit started to hit. And then the Fed said they were investigating him. And then they made him basically sell his shares and get the hell out. Yeah, there's a lot of dirty shit with that. And so I feel like that part should have went deeper into that. like how they really feel, because all the interviews, well, not, I shouldn't say all of them, but most of the interviews were filmed early 2021. And Vince said, and after the initial lawsuit came, Vince didn't film anymore for the documentary. So it was like unfinished. So there was a lot more they could do. But now that he's being investigated by the feds, like I said, I see him going to jail like Diddy. You're trafficking, you're forcing this girl to do things with other people, and crazy. And this documentary was supposed to show that, oh, you're nothing like your character. No, you are your character. Just like these YouTubers, they want to show, oh, they're nothing like themselves on YouTube. No, believe them. If they're shitty people online, you guys, they're shitty people in real life. I promise you. Don't forget that. So yeah, you are who you are. It didn't help you at all. But like I said, Vince did all that nasty, dirty shit. He needs to go to jail too. So for those, so for you blacks out there who be all like, oh, why you never talk about none of the white people, blah, blah, blah. I just did. Vince McMahon is white. He Caucasian. He needs to go to jail too. There you go. So are you happy? Give me a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. He's a white. He needs to go to jail. So there you go. Hi AT2. Did you see? No, I didn't see the Iron Claw. The Von Erich story. Yeah, I didn't see that. I heard it was good though. All right. So everybody in agreement, say aye for Vince going to jail. And what's up, Roxy? Thank you for coming. All right. Moving on to, let me do Diddy before I go with the Jaguar, right?